Welcome to week 3 of Next Steps. As Christians, we are called to be students or followers of Jesus Christ. Church people call that discipleship. But if you grew up in church or have been around it for any amount of time, you know that churches are famous for nagging parishioners, nagging them with guilt and fundraisers. And yet, at the level of people's minds and hearts, we aren't really being asked for anything, not anything that matters or anything that adds any value or even anything that makes a difference in our lives. But true discipleship is about following Jesus Christ, and it's a journey. One which, like every journey, is made up of a series of steps. And that's what this series is all about, the simple steps of discipleship. These specific steps are lifestyle choices that we think are essential if we are trying to grow or strengthen our faith. We think that in order to grow in a relationship with Christ, a relationship in which He can transform and change us, these steps are all important to take. So over the course of this series, we're going to be looking at each of these steps individually. And as we've already noted, these steps we're talking about are not obligations. So just forget about that word for a moment. Forget about it. It's not very helpful. As soon as you look at these steps as obligations, you weaken their potential effectiveness for change and transformation in your life. They are not obligations, and neither are they simply just more things for you to do. We're also not asking you to take all of these steps all at once either. These steps are aimed at simplifying and not complicating your life. And so STEPS is an acronym. S is about service in a ministry or on missions. In fact, Jesus called Himself a servant. It was His preferred title, and He wants His followers to be like that too. T is for tithing and giving. God is generous. God is a giver, and we can use our money and our possessions to become more like Him. E is for engage, which is all about small groups. Faith is personal, but it's not private. It needs to be lived out in a community of people. P is the practice of prayer and the sacraments. And lastly, S is sharing our faith. We find our faith will actually grow when we share it with others. Each week of this series, we're looking at another step. And the step we're looking at this week is actually a great one. In fact, Jesus promises that this step is the path to greatness. And most, if not all of us, want to be great. We don't want to just be okay or mediocre. We don't want to be average. No one aspires to be average. We want to be great. And maybe we don't want to be great in the sense of fame and fortune. I mean, that's not for everybody. But definitely in the sense of best in class kind of great. You know, every mom wants to be a great mom. Every dad wants to be a great dad. Every doctor, lawyer, engineer, teacher wants to be great at their profession. Every friend wants to be a great friend. Every business leader wants to have a great business. We all want to be great in one way or another. But sometimes we might give up on greatness because we're not so sure we can achieve it. Or it seems to come at too steep a cost. And in fact, we're not even sure if we can quite afford it. Or we've tried and we've failed. At least that's the way we feel. We feel like we're failing because you're not making the money and enjoying the promotions that you were expecting. You're finally acknowledging that you just don't have the skills that you need. Your kids are growing up and they seem like ungrateful brats sometimes. And that's just not great. And you don't feel great about it. Did you know that ultimately, greatness is not a prize for the best and the brightest? It's not an award for the lucky few. Greatness is a choice. Greatness is a choice. It's a step we can choose to take, and we all have equal opportunity at taking that step. To understand that choice and that step, we're going to look at a passage from the 9th chapter of the Gospel of Mark. In fact, it was our gospel from last week, where Jesus tells us this, or when we hear this. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, Jesus asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" Jesus and his disciples often went walking on missionary trips, after which they would return to their home base, which was a town called Capernaum. On this particular journey, the disciples were arguing with one another, kind of like how your kids argue in the back seat of the car. And just as you know what they're arguing about, okay, dads have no idea, but moms know. Moms always know what their kids are arguing about. Jesus knew what they were arguing about, but he questions them about it anyway. When they arrive home, and he does that to challenge them, and he uses it actually as a teaching opportunity. We find out why they were arguing in the next verse. Check this out. But they were silent, for on the way they had been arguing with one another who was the greatest. The greatest. Their thinking was conditioned on the assumption that soon Jesus was going to be a king. And as part of his inner circle or his entourage or his posse, they could all expect to enjoy positions of power and influence, wealth and authority. But human nature being what it is, that wasn't enough. They're arguing about who's going to have the most power and influence and authority and wealth. Here's something you need to know about the apostles and nearly all of those early disciples. They did not follow Jesus out of altruistic, selfless motives. They weren't doing it in pursuit of holiness and virtue. They didn't even understand that Jesus was going to suffer and die, or that there would be persecutions and problems ahead. They followed Jesus because they thought that one day he would be king, and that they would profit in worldly ways from that eventually. And their discussion here is all about who is going to profit the most. In fact, they are jockeying for position. Matters of rank are incredibly important to people. And this goes on all the time, right? Who's the most important? Who gets the highest ranking? Who's first in line? Who gets the first class seat? It happens all the time in all realms of life. We love to make lists and ranks and categorize people. And then we figure out where we are in that ranking. In our flawed human nature, there's this comparison trap that we can fall into. We compare ourselves to others. And it's a trap because it can make us feel bad about ourselves if we fail in the comparison, or bad about someone else when they fail. So Jesus sat them down and called the 12 and said, "Whoever wants to be first." Now, the word first can be substituted for great in some translations. So please don't miss this. Jesus isn't taking aim at greatness itself. If you want to be first or great, that's great. God wants you to be great. Christianity, despite how it is sometimes portrayed, is not this wimpy religion that seeks to water down everything and everybody into a shared mediocrity. Christianity is definitely about greatness. Discipleship is about greatness, and by all means, aim toward greatness. It's just that Jesus takes the expected human definition of first place, of best in class, and he turns it upside down. He says this: "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Service and greatness, they go together. Instead of being all about power over people, it's about power for people and to serve people. True greatness becomes serving others. Greatness means leveraging my abilities and my skills and opportunities and influences and any other advantage or resource or skill for the benefit of somebody else. And that's not all. The gospel goes on to say, "Then he took a little child and put it among them. And taking it in his arms, he said to them, 'Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me.'" Jesus is giving a word picture here. He says, greatness is about serving others, and the greatest kind of service is directed towards those who can do nothing for you in return. That is so important. I'm going to say it again. Greatness is about serving others, and the greatest kind of service is directed towards those who can do nothing for you in return. I know. Every act of service, large or small, matters to the economy of God. Every act of service has value in the eyes of heaven. And it actually takes faith to believe that, doesn't it? So learning to serve people who can do nothing for us is actually crucial to growing in faith. Service is an attitude of the heart. That should certainly be put into practice every single day of our lives, whenever the opportunity presents itself. But it is also something that we must intentionally put on our schedules and choose to do, too. It needs to become a part of our lifestyle. One of the 5 steps of discipleship is service. And here we talk about service in 2 ways, in ministry and in missions. These are often interchangeable words, which we have decided to use in 2 different and distinct ways. When we say serve in ministry, we mean serve in our church family, here. Give some of your time, from time to time, or better yet, on a regular basis, in service to the church. Get up out of the pew and serve the parish. The parking ministers serving in our parking lot create a sense of welcoming and hospitality. Greeters and host ministers are doing the same thing at the doors as you enter the church. The kids and student ministers are looking after the next generation for us. And the ministers visiting the sick and the elderly play a crucial role. And obviously, there are many, many other wonderful ministries, too numerous to name, right here tonight. We've said from the beginning of this series that we're not trying to get everyone to take all 5 steps all at once. But if ministry really is your next step, you can get involved right after Mass today by grabbing a card off the Mass Plus One board in the narthex and following the simple instructions on the bottom of the card to get started. It is that simple. All of us can do that. Ministry is about service in the parish. When we serve in missions, we mean service beyond our parish. Jesus gave us a specific instruction when it came to missions. In fact, very specific. He said, "Be my witnesses in Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." Judea is about service in our own community. That's service projects that we undertake right here in Peterborough. Samaria is about serving elsewhere in our country, in places like Toronto or Ottawa, at food banks everywhere. The ends of the earth is service in other countries, like when we went to Honduras. God has given us the ability to extend our influences beyond the pews and out those doors and into the world. Missions and ministry are paths to greatness. That's what we want. That's what we all want. And that's what God wants for us too. Because God is great. And God wants us to be like Him. Discipleship is simply following the Lord, step by step, on the path of greatness. It's following the Lord step by step, day after day, in the direction of discipleship. A little bit more today than yesterday, a little bit more tomorrow than today. And in the process, discovering a greater life.